She is never genuinely isolated. Beyond that silent phone display, 10, 20, maybe 100 men are anticipating her focus. Some show up in expensive vehicles, others display fit physiques and appealing grins. Every one of them arrives bearing gifts. And then there's you, lacking wealth, a flawless body, or smooth opening lines. But here's the truth. All of that is irrelevant. For Machiavelli would have grinned your way. He grasped what all desperate men overlook. That strength isn't about seeming superior, but about being impossible to forget. Sure, you might contend, you might attempt to awe her, offer presents, compose poetry, assign songs, yet each effort to distinguish yourself just sinks you further with the others, and she senses it. Not via reason, but via intuition. The aroma of desperation, the stress concealed in your voice, the tense energy belying your composure. She isn't dissecting these details, she is merely perceiving them. Since women don't select as men do, they experience emotion before cognition. This leads to the awkward reality. The more you strive for her affection, the less she'll give. The second you alter yourself to match her ideals, you cease being genuine, you turn into the 10th copy, and at that point, you've already failed. Yet, an alternative way exists, one rarely found. It doesn't concern gimmicks, rehearsed lines, or contemporary methods. It concerns something much profounder: psychology, perception, emotional discipline, and strategy. Machiavelli detailed rulers, influence, and manipulation. Still, if he lived now, he wouldn't reside in a castle. He'd be present, teaching you to master something vastly more intricate than a kingdom: the emotional longing of a woman encircled by infinite choices. For what motivates a queen mirrors what motivates a sovereign: the craving for the scarce, the allure of the enigmatic, the urge to experience what others can't evoke. This isn't one more tutorial on attraction. It's a guide for the minority, the 10% bold enough to defy the game's conventions. If you arrived seeking quick fixes or mystical solutions, leave immediately. But if you're prepared to be the sort of man who avoids competition, knowing he can already direct the emotional arena, continue paying attention. You are on the verge of learning how to get her to select you, despite 1,000 men pursuing her. The 9 vying for her fondness have already failed. Not due to being unappealing, nor missing wealth or flair, but because they think seduction is a contest, and the quicker they sprint, the more she eludes them. Since female desire reacts not to exertion, but to enigma. One man messages her each dawn, another forwards jokes and memes, the following provides dinner and focus. Varying appearances, identical routine, more striving, more approval-seeking, more foreseeable actions. What they don't grasp is that, through this, they all land in the identical classification, the group of men who are excessively accessible. And that which is readily accessible, regardless of its worth, turns common, and the commonplace is overlooked. Machiavelli grasped this ages ago. Excessive generosity lacking rarity fosters disdain. In the domain of attraction, foreseeing actions is fatal. Each immediate response, each surplus plaudit, each dependent motion conveys the same silent fact. You hold the control. I merely desire selection. And that, my friend, is the point where allure expires. Envision this. You're in a hiring meeting, and an applicant enters stating, "I'll do whatever it takes. Just offer me the opportunity." Does that demand esteem? Does it instill assurance? No, it solely generates sympathy. Since genuine self-assurance isn't declared, it's perceived. That is the thing the other 9 men failed to comprehend. They are utterly fixated on selection, so they overlook the most vital principle. A woman isn't won by the man striving hardest to awe her. She is won by the one who evokes an indefinable feeling in her. And that feeling originates not from your actions, but from your restraint. You don't pursue. You don't plead. You don't persist. Since you grasp that longing thrives in separation, that rarity attracts more powerfully than abundance, that opportune quietness resounds more than countless phrases, You don't disappear to manipulate. You withdraw because your existence already possesses substance and purpose. And she perceives that distinction. The man who declines to contend disturbs her. He disrupts her assumptions. She starts to question, why isn't he behaving like the rest? Why isn't he chasing me? Why doesn't he yield for my focus? That ambiguity sparks curiosity. Curiosity evolves into concentration, and concentration is the initial spark of longing. They queue up. You cultivate enigma. They reveal everything. You watch. They become frantic. You determine when to emerge. That isn't haughtiness. It is tactics. It is influence without clamor. It is the boundary dividing a fan from an event, and that distinction dictates all. Who stays an exchangeable choice and who turns indelible? Have you observed the common trait of all men women covertly desire? It isn't attractiveness. It isn't riches. It is presence. The serene weight of a man requiring no validation, since the one who declines to vie exudes something perilously alluring. Self-value. When he steps into a space not looking for gazes, yet the ambiance alters near him, that isn't chance. It is the resonance of internal balance, emotional discipline, and an existence already complete. And she perceives that ere one word exits your lips, while the other 9 attempt to fit her perfect image, you emerge as the test. They hunt for validation. You create a resonance. They yield to appease. You establish the mood. They fight to fit within her reality. You stay the man already possessing his own. An unspoken law exists, one Machiavelli would have put on page 1. The man who wins isn't the one playing optimally, but the one altering the rules. As the others vie for her focus, you execute the unimaginable. You withdraw from the contest, and that lone action revises the entire interaction. She is accustomed to men who pursue, reply in moments, inquire if she's okay, who perpetually fret over her ideas, her feelings, her requirements. Compassion isn't the foe. The assassin of allure is foreseeability. When she can anticipate every phrase you'll utter, knows the timing and the reason, the enigma expires. And lacking enigma, there is no ignition. Influence never resides in your actions for her. True influence resides in what you arouse within her, without exerting more than minimal effort. Are you aware of the outcome when you cease engaging in her game? The whole structure implodes. She halts, ambivalent, unready. That faint unease within her starts to stir an indefinable thing, a profound, nearly automatic intrigue to comprehend you, not from your increased effort, but from your disruption of her emotional script. Her psyche anticipated a known tempo, but you shattered the progression. While the others behave precisely as she forecasts, you behave in ways she can't foresee. You aren't impolite, you aren't aloof, but you aren't easily read either. You are an enigma without an obvious answer. And that specific mystery draws her close. This is the reason non-pursuit builds worth. Since each text you opt against sending, each response you don't hasten, each quiet moment you maintain with assurance, constructs an emotional pull mightier than any tender phrase ever could. It isn't apathy, it is psychological polish. It is the silent command of a man whose internal realm is so stable he doesn't require focus to feel important. She doesn't recall you for your constant talking. She recalls you because upon speaking, each word had weight. Do you want to be indelible? Then grasp this fact. The man declining the game turns into the reward, since you aren't just one more guest attempting to access her world. You are a man whose existence already holds a wholeness that makes her desire entry. And this isn't lyrical hyperbole. It is biology. When a woman perceives you aren't characterized by her approval, something in her emotional framework starts to realign. You cease being merely a pursuer. You become an exception, an emotionally unreachable man. And in a reality where all plead for recognition, that type of man is like flame encircled by frost. The unforeseen always creates the most powerful attraction. You withdraw from the game, comprehending a difficult fact. The game is fixed. Victory isn't possible by vying for focus, since your vitality is worth more than her validation. And though you never voice it, that fact emanates from you, via your bearing, your quiet stillness, your stable look devoid of stress. As others yield to her, you are the one fracturing her tempo. They contort themselves to match her reality. You stay unformed, unyielding. And that composure, that emotional discipline, resounds more than myriad hurried messages. The power of declining the game isn't a ploy. It is the most distinct indicator that you've already selected yourself. And when a man selects himself initially, she senses it. She cannot disregard it. Being recalled by a woman isn't about flawlessness. It concerns the emotional imprint you impart. And that imprint isn't etched in bouquets, presents, or praise. It is logged in something few ever grasp: emotional anchoring. An emotional anchor is an instant so filled with sentiment that her psyche connects that feeling to you. It isn't constructed via reason. It is constructed via feeling. And once that anchor is set, each time that feeling reemerges in her existence, she will recall you. Despite other people, despite her being with another, despite the passage of time. Machiavelli would have termed that the supreme mode of influence, as true influence isn't direct command, but the capacity to affect while absent. And here lies the harsh reality. She doesn't recall the man who acted the kindest. She recalls the one who stirred her spirit. It might seem unjust, but it is completely true. This is the reason innumerable decent men vanish into obscurity. Not from a deficit of goodness, but from being emotionally unremarkable. And neutrality never stays in the memory. The human psyche doesn't retain tranquility. It retains extremities. It clings to what rattles it, what upsets its equilibrium, what makes it sense vitality. Do you perceive it yet? You don't have to be superior. You just have to be impossible to dismiss. And how is that accomplished? Not via cunning, but via profundity, by moving past the dialogue all other men recite. When others say, "You are lovely," you gaze further and state, "There is a quality in your worldview that disturbs me, and I adore that." Not from rehearsal, but from being engaged, since you perceive her past the physique, past the adornment, past the facade. The majority offer her the expected, constant approval. You provide what she covertly desires: introspection. Your aim isn't her affection. Your aim is to occupy her thoughts in your absence, and that occurs only by accessing parts of her psyche nobody has ever accessed, when she senses no one has grasped her paradoxes as you have, when your phrases stir ideas that leave her quietly unsettled, when you assist her in perceiving something inside her she previously couldn't articulate. That is emotional anchoring, and in it rests the most profound psychological process. The human psyche fails to distinguish the feeling from its origin. When you activate a potent sentiment, her unconscious mind links that sentiment straight to you. This is the method of marketing. This is the method of trauma. And that is precisely the mechanism of attraction. You don't desire recollection as the kind man who was perpetually accessible. You desire to be the idea that reappears unexpectedly, the one she cannot evade. You want her to listen to music and sense your proximity, to detect a known aroma and recall you, to observe a dusk sky and question your location. That is the meaning of occupying her thoughts even while absent. And that isn't accomplished via rivalry, only via distinct instances. You don't require numerous ones, merely one or two that resonate profoundly. A discussion that made an impression, an action she never foresaw, a sentence that continued to reverberate long past its utterance, a quiet that made her spirit restless, a departure she never predicted, the other's battle for constancy. You fashion instances that cannot be replicated. They grasp to remain near. You are the individual who, despite being gone, never fully vanishes. Yet a profounder level to this skill exists. The most potent emotional anchor isn't constructed on transient desire. It is constructed upon metamorphosis. If she senses that, with you, she finds a new facet of her being, that she starts to perceive differently, that she reestablishes contact with feelings others failed to touch, then she doesn't just recall you, she requires you, not from your reliance on her, but because emotionally you liberated her. You revealed to her a new realm of sensation. And the most perilous fact of all is this encounter happens solely with you. You aren't simply a person who traversed her narrative. You are a pivotal moment. You aren't just a strong recollection. You become her fresh emotional benchmark. Following you, the others aren't just inferior, they are insignificant. And that warping, that inward evaluation, doesn't vanish quickly. A cause exists for why you might be all she claims to desire, yet remain unselected. And it isn't your blame. It's because nobody instructed you on the real workings of female psychology. Not education, not companions, not even relatives. Yet now, that alters, as what you're poised to discover will utterly rebuild your perception of desire. Initially, you must grasp a vital point. The female mind handles desire in a manner wholly distinct from the male mind. And this isn't lyricism, it's neuroscience. Functional MRI imaging shows that as men react to allure, the brain's visual hubs illuminate. In women, conversely, the areas most stimulated are linked to emotional recall, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. What does that disclose? It signifies a woman isn't captivated by her sight, but by her feelings when with you. Men are pulled by visuals. Women are pulled by the sentiments those visuals arouse within them. This explains why two men with identical physical features can exist, yet one sparks longing and the other apathy. The distinction is never the physique, it is the emotional resonance they emit. We now arrive at the initial scientific principle. Female longing hinges on emotional fervor and unforeseeability. For a woman to experience profound allure, two elements must be present: a sentiment that stirs her, and the ambiguity of its timing or manner. If you are overly straightforward, accessible, or restrained, you level her emotional topography. And lacking emotional contours, there is no profundity. This explains why the good man recedes. He provides security, but not excitement. He presents tranquility, but zero suspense. Conversely, the man who commands his presence, who offsets focus with quiet, connection with separation, curiosity with reserve, triggers a completely distinct response: emotional captivation. Now for the second potent fact. As according to attachment theory, introduced by John Bowlby and subsequently broadened by Mary Ainsworth, the most profound emotional connections aren't established with the most generous giver, but with the one who strategically regulates his emotional accessibility. This isn't vanishing to ploy, it's directing the cadence of your proximity, because with constant presence, with no break or ambiguity, the brain ceases dopamine production, the substance of longing. But, by merging instances of deep linkage with periods of separation and quiet, you stir something far mightier, a psychological phenomenon called emotional expectation. And expectation is vastly more habit-forming than any present, praise, or relentless focus. That isn't scheming, it is biology. Lastly, the third idea. A woman doesn't recall your actions for her. She recalls her self-perception while with you. If she perceives herself as more vibrant, genuine, or noticed when with you, you establish a connection much profounder than any romantic motion could build. This is exactly why the other 9 fall short. Their focus is her. Your focus is the image she perceives of herself in your vicinity. And that distinction puts you in your own classification. You aren't one more hopeful struggling for access. You are the reflection that reveals to her feelings she was previously unaware of. You aren't the 10th man queuing. You are the one who stirs her internal reality. Here is an additional psychological gem rarely understood. The human psyche doesn't distinctly divide imagination from recollection. Stated differently, if you can get her to envision you, to picture scenarios involving you, if she starts to fantasize about you being there, you've already penetrated her neural environment. You aren't just taking up her cognitions, you are inhabiting her mind's emotional pathways. And that, my friend, isn't accomplished by the man doing the most, but by the man eliciting the most. It is unseen by the eye, yet inside her psyche, you are building an emotional domain. Machiavelli once noted that intellect overcomes strongholds better than raw power. That applies nowhere more aptly than in the skill of attraction. While others think attraction is about evoking laughter, you grasp it's about evoking feeling. And not just any feeling, but an unexchangeable one, something no other person can duplicate. Now you see why this communication isn't for all. Since what you are absorbing isn't an assortment of lines, it is a rebuilding of your perception of influence and allure. You cease to contend, because you now perceive the reality. As allure is never attained, it is produced. Longing is never pleaded for, it is kindled. And influence is never compelled, it is emitted. That comprehension, that emotional acuity, lifts you significantly above the others. The man who genuinely understands the female psyche's operation has no need for manipulation. He just stays conscious, calm, and deliberate. She will never voice it, yet she perpetually senses it. The distinction between a man requiring focus to feel vital and a man already complete internally. And that sort of man, the one who doesn't pursue, scheme, or respond rashly, possesses an undeniable influence. While the other 9 talk incessantly to occupy quiet, you command the skill of remaining silent at the opportune time, not from a shortage of words, but from grasping what they won't. True influence isn't in talking, it is in rousing sentiment. And this, precisely here, is where Machiavelli would signal agreement. Since this isn't about theatrics, it's about growing so inwardly coherent, so solid in your being, that your mere existence turns into a communication, a faint alert, an emotional frequency she cannot disregard. She senses it, though she can't articulate it, because your transmission is unrelated to vocabulary. It emanates via presence. A silent intensity exists when you converse with her, not the tremor of nervousness, but the calm of concentration. She perceives it. You aren't engaging in the identical contest as all others. You aren't present to appease. You aren't present to vanquish. You are present to comprehend, to discover, not to act, to link, not to pursue. And when such a man stands in front of her, her emotional programming starts to fail. Since she's accustomed to eliciting foreseeable responses, immediate focus, faint despair, constant approval, but you refuse to fuel that mechanism, not due to apathy, but because you function on an elevated level of emotional command. And that degree of control is never haphazard. It stems from consciousness, regulation, and self-esteem. At this point, you grasp the central fact. Female longing reacts not to exertion, but to observation. If she observes your rarity, not from your behavior, but from your being, as if she detects you aren't striving for her validation but merely abiding in your reality, her perspective of you starts to alter. She begins watching you distinctly. Her cognitions shift internally. Why no reaction? Why no pursuit? Why no need for selection? And within that bewilderment, the ideal suspense arises, a mix of allure and ambiguity, since genuine longing always surfaces where command vanishes. The shortcoming of the 9 others rests in their fixation on comprehension. You, conversely, pursue something much grander, to be perceived. You don't articulate. You personify. You don't pledge. You illustrate. You don't pursue a standard. You establish one. And she senses that difference continually. When you talk, your phrases hold weight. You talk infrequently, but upon doing so, every word arrives with accuracy. Not from acting, but from certainty in your identity. That sort of composure cannot be faked. It is shaped by introspection, regulation, limits, and actual living. This is the reason she cannot handle you as she handles the others, since with you, her typical ploys lack fuel. You pursue no one. You don't stay where mutuality is absent, and while she might never voice it, that position gains her esteem. Machiavelli once stated that properly guided fear preserves control. Yet in the domain of allure, the influence commanding esteem isn't terror. It is the emotional detachment of a man declining self-degradation. When a woman perceives your potential departure, not as penalty, but as a peaceful exit at any time, her whole emotional framework sparks. You exit the category of the exchangeable. You access a zone few men attain, the zone of the man whose departure creates a vacuum. And that vacuum, regardless of others' attempts, they cannot occupy. Do you understand the reason? You didn't provide approval. You provided perspective. You didn't give assurances. You prompted introspection. You didn't elevate her onto a platform. You beckoned her to ascend. That faint yet steady force, that emotional pull, is what divides one more pursuer from an event. This is the Machiavellian tenet of attraction, not via deception, but via consciousness, self-command, and emotional separation. Since you grasp something, the others never will. A man's stature isn't gauged by the quantity of gazes on him, but by his capacity to leave without shattering his tranquility. That serene exit, that quiet power, is your final tool. Most men think remaining proves affection, that tenacity, endurance, and delay signify commitment. Yet what they were never informed is this. On the emotional front, the real influence isn't held by the one remaining. It is held by the one capable of departing fearlessly, and here arrives the harshest contradiction. The man prepared to exit is invariably the one who ultimately remains the longest. The reason? He doesn't remain from reliance. He remains from his own volition, and that sole difference alters all. She perceives it, not via reason, but via intuition. You aren't dependent. You aren't ensnared by her approval. You aren't attempting to persuade her of anything. If she departs, you stay composed. If she goes quiet, you stay centered. If she alters, you stay stable. And that capacity to stay complete, despite her non-presence, is what renders you unexchangeable. The human psyche values only what it anticipates losing, and by conveying that you won't remain where unappreciated, you send a communication more potent than any loving admission. I am capable of existing without you, yet I select being present, but solely while mutual esteem exists. To an adult woman, that isn't haughtiness. It is allure, since you are demonstrating what the majority of men are missing, functional self-esteem, not superficial ego. Not vanity, but lucidity, the awareness of your identity. You aren't capitulating. You just decline to compel reverberations in vacant spaces, since you recognize your vitality is too precious to squander. And the instant she comprehends your actual potential departure, all changes. You cease being the chaser. You become the one who might disappear. That doesn't create terror. It stirs emotional immediacy, since perceiving your ability to leave without rage, ploys, or resentment, just tranquility, makes you cease being a choice. You turn into a benchmark. And that, my friend, is a completely separate plane. That is the point she stops evaluating you against others. Since you are not contending anymore, you have already secured something vastly superior, self-command. In that phase, your being turns contradictory. You are the one capable of departure, and still the sole one deserving of continuance. You are the man not requiring affection for wholeness, yet able to offer it with profound honesty. You request nothing, yet your non-presence has substance. And that instant, that serene, immovable instant, is where all metamorphoses. When you can meet her gaze and state, lacking bitterness, stress, or hurt. I don't require this situation. but during my time, I offered my best. That is the supreme proclamation of emotional fortitude. S, and the elegance of it. You never have to voice it. Since she is already aware, she has observed it. S, she has perceived it. The 9 others will attempt anything to stay. You turn indelible as you are the sole one capable of departing. S, with tranquility. Machiavelli articulated it perfectly. He relying on another's volition cannot control his own fate. In attraction, this means, if your emotional equilibrium hinges on her actions, you've already failed. But if your serenity is inviolable, then all women will perceive it, despite your silence. You aren't present to gain validation, you are present to assess compatibility. And lacking that compatibility, you exit silently, without rage, grievance, but with lucidity. And it's in that quiet, when you don't halt her, don't pursue anew, don't recall her loss, that you start occupying her psyche without cost. Since the man unafraid of loss is the sole one who genuinely remains. It seems potent, yes? You sense it in your core. Motivated, alert, sure. Yet recall, comprehension lacking execution is worthless. And this is the point most men fail. They hear, they agree, they are stirred, but they never utilize it. They continue texting when quiet is needed. S. They continue pursuing what disregards them. They continue reducing their criteria merely to enter environments unworthy of them. So this is it. No rationalizations, no delusions. If you genuinely desire a woman's selection, despite her 1,000 choices, you must initially be the man who selects himself. And that starts with the minutest actions of emotional control. She voids arrangements. Don't rage. But also don't rearrange your life, as though you lacked your own agenda. Reply serenely. Proceed with your schedule. Allow her to observe that your existence doesn't yield to impulse. It progresses by decision. When she ignores your text, don't message again. Don't clarify. Don't pursue. Remain quiet. Let your non-presence convey the communication. Your phrases must never yell, I do not vie for focus. When she becomes remote, don't attempt to bridge the void with surplus exertion. Mirror her presence back, and if her offering is frigid, you establish your boundary. Not from ego, but from criteria. This isn't an instantaneous event. It is a drill. SA regimen. Each instance you sense the impulse to plead for approval and substitute it with an action of self-esteem, your mind starts to remap its own pathways. You begin sensing power where stress resided, root, certainty where dread resided, lucidity where bewilderment resided. True, it stings initially. Esses, since your ego desires all to succeed, yet the instant you grasp that whatever requires your diminishment was never your destiny, that is the point the metamorphosis starts. Machiavelli never authored works on love, but if he had, he'd have penned this. The supreme victory is to never forfeit your identity while chasing someone else. So cease inquiring, how do I awe her? Inquire instead, am I existing as a man who selects himself daily? Since when the reply turns affirmative, you no longer require validation. She perceives it ere you talk. It's the majority will arrive here and yet alter nothing. They will continue pursuing, continue vying, continue attempting to gain the focus of a woman who will dismiss them by the next week. But not you. You are present for a purpose, since a part of you is already aware. Longing isn't pleaded for. It is generated. Esteem isn't requisitioned. It is emitted. And a woman never selects the one who strives.